Hi, this is Mike Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock, and the 1002nd album is I Feel Alright by Steve Earle.
Hi, I'm Jeff Stephen, and you're listening to the 1002nd Album Podcast. I spent 10 years going through the 1001 albums you must hear before you die, and now I'm asking people that are important to me all about the albums that are important to them. Enjoy! This is the 1002nd Album Podcast. I'm Jeff Stephen, and I'm particularly excited for today's episode. For my guest today, we've been chatting for about 10 years over the computers. I believe he was one of the first people I started following back on WordPress for his record store tales. The host of the LeBrain train, the host of Grab a Stack of Rock, and his wonderful spouse has wonderful taste in early 90s NHL hockey. Please welcome Mike Ladano.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So happy to be here, too.
Yes, and likewise. The album of choice today is Steve Earle's I Feel Alright. And to borrow a Weird Al tune, the saga begins. And where does the saga begin for LeBrain and Steve Earle?
Well, I suppose, like every good Canadian boy, I first discovered Steve Earle in 1988 on Much Music. Because if you recall, Copperhead Road was very big, and that song was getting a lot of play. It had a lot of crossover with the rock crowd, so a lot of my rock buddies liked it. Steve Earle was kind of like a rocker. He had the long hair, he had the bandana, he looked scruffy, and yeah, that's when I first became aware of Steve Earle. Of course, we know now he really hit the map with Guitar Town, his debut album, which is on the 1001. But on a more personal note, Steve Earle really grabbed onto my heart in the year 1997, which was the year after I Feel Alright came out. And as you know from reading the record store tales, the 90s, the late 90s in particular, was my time at the record store. And my best buddy was a guy that we all know as T-Rev. And T-Rev, during the record store years, introduced me to so much music, including the Foo Fighters via Color and the Shape, which you did a 1001 or 1002nd episode on. And that whole Foo Fighters, Color in the Shape, Steve Earle, I Feel Alright, come from the same person. They come from the same year in my life. And both records impacted me equally at the same time. T-Rev was always trying to get me into different kinds of music, and he loved Steve Earle. He was early on the Steve Earle train. And I Feel Alright was Steve Earle's kind of a comeback record. He hit a rough patch, and in 1993 he was arrested for possession of heroin. And then in 1994 he was arrested for possession of cocaine and weapons, and then he skipped his court date, and he ended up spending only 60 days in jail, although he was sentenced to a year. But that experience changed him, completely changed him. He has been clean since that time. And there's a funny liner note inside the I Feel Alright album where Steve talks about this period in his life. And he says, "When I was locked up, I was ready to go off on this boy that stole my radio. My partner, Paul, asked me where I was going. I said, to get my radio and then go to the hole for a little while. He looked at me like I look at my 13-year-old sometimes and said, no, you ain't. You're going to sit your little white ass down and do your little time, and then you're going to go out here and make me a nice record." So he made two. And the first was called Train A-Comin', and it's much more acoustic, more bluegrass. I Feel Alright was his mainstream kind of country rock hybrid record that really appealed to the Copperhead Road crowd. But the lyrics and even the music, it just strikes me as so much more personal. Steve just, I mean, he'd experienced so much by that point in his life, multiple marriages, kids, now this jail experience and getting off of the drugs permanently. It changed his life. And that pair of records, they really do go together. But I Feel Alright's the one that speaks to me because it rocks. And upon hearing it the first time, it was like an epiphany. Like, Steve Earle is now a part of my life. And this record, I played it, God, how many times this week? I don't know, maybe a dozen. And it's still great. There's only one track that I would potentially skip, but I consider this a whole, a work of art. You know, you can't skip. I don't do that anyway through records, but there's only one track on here that I would consider a skipper, and that's out of what, 11 or 12 tracks. So there you go, Jeff. I mean, I hope I didn't go over time there.
No, not at all. No, and those and if it's 11 out of 12 that are keepers, that's a pretty good ratio, which I like. And I like T Rev's got some fine taste in music too. If color and the shape and I feel all right, she's responsible for bringing those to your attention, then that's a pretty solid pair to go with. The and I'm glad you mentioned Guitar Town as well, because like you said, it was on the 1001 list. And but unfortunately, in terms of the 1001 list editors, that was where the Steve Earle collection ended for the list. But in terms of Steve Earle's career, as you mentioned, he had the sort of two records coming out of his time in prison there, and he's been I guess this was his sixth studio album, and he's still going strong. Is there how does this sort of compare to the rest of his collection?
Well, it's my favorite, so that's my personal bias. I
Mhm.
think Steve Earle has phases in his career, and Guitar Town is a very twangy, upbeat, largely. It does have somber ballads, but it's more upbeat. Like if you've ever heard some of those songs, actually, there's two on the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles soundtrack that kind of harken back to that Guitar Town sound. There's a track called Hillbilly Highway that's a very up in that hillbilly highway, very 80s
Yeah.
upbeat country that was popular at that time. But I Feel All Right is a new era. That hybrid of rock and country had really coalesced on this album, and it carried forward on the next record, 1997's El Corazon, which is great as well. They're very much brother records. Interestingly enough, this entire era of Steve Earle's career, from I Feel All Right to the present, can kind of be visually defined by the cover art. Every cover was designed by a guy by the name of Tony Fitzpatrick, and they are all unified in style. If you saw them all lined up, you'd be like, well, that's clearly a series. That doesn't mean that all the albums sound the same. They're vastly different. He's done a bluegrass album with Del McCoury called The Mountain. But I Feel All Right to me is the kickoff of this entire period, this renaissance of Steve Earle. It's just been a joy to watch him go through the years since this time. He's been so prolific, and I haven't been able to keep up. And this is a discussion that I had with our mutual friend Tim Derling on his show, Tim's Vinyl Confessions. You just don't have time at our age, in our adulthood. We don't have time to absorb each record like we did in our youth, when I might buy 2 records a month, and that gives me 2 weeks with each one to absorb it without really listening to much else. But now my record collection is massive. And I love the old records as much as the new, but I do not have enough hours in the day. We work, we have lives, we have responsibilities, and we don't have the time to sit on the bed with the lyric sheet and absorb. So I haven't absorbed Steve Earle's the last 15 years of his career, and that's too bad, because he's endured even more stuff in the last 15 years. His son, Justin Townes Earle, died of a drug overdose, and he did an entire album of Justin's songs. Unfortunately, I just haven't had the time, which I feel bad about, because Steve Earle's a great artist.
Mhm.
And he's actually embarking on a solo acoustic tour as we speak.
Nice. No, and that's it is a challenge too, because like you said, he's been so prolific, and not only has he been, writing and recording his own music, but I gather he's also producing, he's an author, he's an actor, he's playing all these different instruments. And so he's needless to say, he hasn't been bored over the last few decades. And but then again, if his career longevity is any indication, it doesn't sound like the label of jack of all trades and master of none would be an appropriate description of him. Would that be fair in saying?
Jack of all trades and master of none. I'd say he's mastered a few. Now, I haven't read his books, but I've read good things about his books. He's very quotable. He's fiercely intelligent. He's politically active. He's very anti-death penalty, which has endeared him with Canada. He spends a lot of time here in Canada. And I think Steve Earle is somebody who's endured a lot and learned a lot in his life, whether it be musically or on the screen or just speaking to an audience. I think he's a master of many trades. The one trade that he's not the master of, though, is marriage. Unfortunately, he's gone through a number of those, but that's his business and not mine.
But musically, he seems to at least be excelling in the music department, which is the main thing and the reason we're here, of course, today.
And it's a shame that record sales don't reflect that, but he has survived and thrived. And like I said, he's very prolific. He has continued to produce new music all the time.
Yeah. Nice, which is a good problem to have, that there's too much for us to keep up with. So hopefully one day when time permits, we'll be able to immerse a little more in it and that sort of thing, which is good. Now, luckily, at least for both of us, we've been able to at least immerse a bit in I Feel All Right over the last little while. And do you find among the 12 tunes, apart from the skippable one, are there ones that jump out at the running order for you in terms of the music or the lyrics or the different moments?
For the record, the skippable one is the track called "Cocaine Cannot Kill My Pain."
Yes.
It's very dark, and
Yes.
that's not to say it doesn't belong on the album, because there it is. That's it. It's out there. That's part of the record. It's just the one that if I'm sitting down listening to an album on my front porch, I'm gonna just maybe not have a great time during that song.
And I like how on the track list, at least that I saw, they called it CCKMP as well.
Right. And that
Yeah.
may be simply to get it into the shelves on
Yeah.
the Walmarts of the world.
Yeah.
Standout tracks, though. We were discussing earlier this week, Hardcore Troubadour, my absolute favorite. And I 1996, man, I was a single man. I was vying after, whatever girl it was, and there was always some other guy. So, lyrics like, girl, you better figure out which is which. Wherefore art thou, Romeo, you son of a bitch? That spoke to me at the time. It was like, why? Why is there always some other guy vying for the same girl as me? And it just always felt like there was some other Romeo out there. Then there's a track, Billy and Bonnie. It's kind of like it's one of those robbery tracks. They knocked a Texaco or something like that. And it's upbeat and fun, and it's got some bluegrass to it. Man, that opening track, I Feel All Right, is pretty epic too. It's powerful, but yet it's got this really memorable melodic chorus. Some of the guitar work on this album is stellar, and this features his bassist Kelly Looney, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, but he was very popular with the fans, bassist Kelly Looney. Another one that I'll mention is The Unrepentant. I find the lyrics on this song just so epic. It's a face-off with the devil. I'll just read a few lines here. Now he's standing at hell's door with a bad attitude and a 44. The devil said, "What's up, man? Now what you come here for?" He said, "Listen, man, let's get to it." He said, "I always heard that you were the bad one. There's a few places I ain't been, a few things I ain't done. You got your pitchfork and I got my gun. Somebody's got to do it." Now that's just bad, That is just bad. Steve Earle, he just has a way with words. He's a fantastic lyricist. He paints pictures. He tells stories. Those are some of my favorites.
Nice. And no misses there for sure. And I love the Hardcore Troubadour was a good one for me too, because I'm thinking in 1996, I think I still would have been of the ABC model. If somebody asked me, "Oh, what kind of music do you like?" It would be the anything but country. And so because it was rocking enough, I think it would have passed my, again, 1996 test at the time, because it had that, yeah, like you said, the really sort of up-tempo-ness to it, and sort of that sort of perfect, like you described it as the crossover, the hybrid, maybe a bit of Blue Rodeo type thing, where it was rocking enough to keep me engaged. Now I love it all. Again, I've abandoned my ABC ways, but I thought that one was a really nice up-tempo tune. The one after too, More Than I Can Do, I really enjoyed as well. It brought me to sort of did you ever hear the Ryan Adams album Gold from the early 2000s?
I have heard Gold, but it has been
Yeah.
so long. It's not in my collection. Although
Oh, okay, fair enough. Nice.
Demolition is one of my absolute favorite Ryan
Oh,
Adams
nice.
albums.
Nice. So this it was there was a tune on there called Firecracker that when I heard More Than I Can Do, I was like, oh, I bet Ryan Adams was listening to this when he wrote Firecracker, because it had that same, like, that beautiful harmonica intro to kick it off, and just great stuff. Yeah. And I thought it was a bold move too, ending the album with You're Still Standing There. And so what do you make of that tune?
Love it. I love
Yeah.
duets. I
Yeah.
love duets. And I believe it's Lucinda Williams on that track, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken.
That's right.
Their voices work great together. She's got a great twang in her voice, and Steve has that natural twang as well. I love the track. It's so upbeat, and it just makes you, to me, happy that Steve is back.
Yeah.
To me, that's the ending of the the railroad, this curvy track that he's been on, and all these ups and downs, optimism for the future. And indeed, like, every album he's done since has been critically acclaimed to varying degrees. If I had to put a high point on his post I Feel All Right career, there's an album that I absolutely love called Transcendental Blues. And this one introduces an Irish influence, so he's constantly growing. I just can't say enough about this album, Jeff. I believe everybody should give it a shot. I think there's something on there for almost everybody. There's something slow and loving, and there's something more hardcore. He did an EP with the Super Suckers a little bit later on after this as well. Honestly, Steve Earle, to me, is an artist that there's something for everybody. And I Feel All Right is like the cream of the crop of that era.
Yeah, I like it. And the for me, as you know, we've talked about visuals as well. And for me, when I was listening to this, I had this sort of visual of a parabola or a quadratic relation where it started with big energy, with like the hardcore troubadour, More Than I Can Do. It's sort of in terms of the energy levels, it went down in the middle of it, but not in quality, but just the tempos came down a bit. And then towards the end, when they wrapped it up with the fun Billy and Bonnie, and then You're Still Standing There, the curve came back up to the big energy to end it. And if you get me thinking about quadratic relations in an album, of course, it's got my vote of approval, which I like. But I thought it was a neat idea with that You're Still Standing There too, where it brought me back to also from 96 5440's album, where they wrapped it up with the tune Lies to Me. And it was one of the first times I remember an album really going out with like a big energy number. Often I think of a closer being sort of an emotional climax or that sort of thing, or maybe something subdued to take you out. But I really like that idea of, like you said, if this is the comeback, this is the reason for optimism, ending with that real high note, I thought was a nice detail here.
I love that you not only think about this album graphically, but that you've been thinking about albums graphically since 5440. So Jeff, kudos to you, my friend. I wish that we could all share your gift for I'm just going to spend a moment praising Jeff Stephen, but my goodness, if anybody is the master of talking about an album graphically, it is you, my friend, and I wish I had your gift.
No, much appreciated. But I guess that's the part of the reason for the podcast too, is that I realized when writing about music, I inevitably went to graphs. And so this sort of forced me to rely on more audio. It's like, I guess you can take the graph out of the podcast, but you can't, or what's the country out of the boy, but not boy out of the country, or some variation. But much appreciated.
Funny you should mention that, because another one of Steve Earle's great post I Feel All Right albums is the one where you took the country boy out of the country and placed him in New York City. Okay. Washington Square Serenade, his New York City album. Fantastic. I played a lot of Steve Earle this week. There's another one I'm recommending to the listeners today, Washington Square Serenade by Steve Earle. Fantastic. Mixing urban music with his brand of alt country rock.
I like it. Nice. So then, in addition to the recommendations of things like Washington Square, Transcendental Blues, if you had to summarize what exactly it is about I Feel All Right, why should this one in particular be the 1,000-second album that one must hear?
Simple answer to that one. Je ne sais quoi. Certain albums are magic, aren't they? This is the one. This is the one that's magic. And that's not a slight against any of the others. Now, of course, there's always a personal slant to that. You know, we talked about my experience in 1997, this album coming into my life. Everybody has a personal experience with an album that they rate highly, you know? And that's no different for me, so that's my bias. That's my answer.
I like it. And I think that's probably the optimal description of those albums that are so impactful, where there is that, as you say, je ne sais quoi, or that undefinable or indescribable quality where it just, the other ones might be objectively or statistically good in some way, but this one just speaks to you on another level, and it's tough to quantify that in any way.
Well said. That's exactly it. Tough to quantify. And, you know, magic. I say it again, magic. There's a magic period in his life too, you know?
Yeah.
He had a new lease on life. And if that's audible in music, in the grooves of a record, in the ones and zeros of a CD, there it is. It's here on this album.
I like it. I like it. Well, a huge thank you for coming today, Mike. And until the next time.
Till the next time, go Leafs, go.
Yeah. Enjoy.
Enjoy, yes.
This has been the 1000 Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.